Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. The trip to the mountains had been Sandra's idea, pitched as a way to reconnect as a family. North Carolina's Blue Ridge Parkway promised serene views, cool breezes, and plenty of moments to reset from the daily grind. We loaded up the SUV, packed snacks for the kids, and began what I thought would be a peaceful escape. Looking back, that drive was the first sign something was wrong. Sandra had always been chatty during our road trips, filling the time with stories about work or joking with the kids. This time, she seemed glued to her phone. Work emergencies, she claimed when I asked why she was scrolling incessantly. Her explanation didn't sit well, especially since she worked part-time as a sales rep for a pool company. How many crises could pool supplies generate? But I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just stress. Everyone was juggling something these days. Halfway to the mountains, Sandra asked to stop at a convenience store. She darted inside, leaving her phone on the passenger seat. I didn't think much of it until the screen lit up with a text, "I can't wait for tonight, my love." My chest tightened, but I tried to stay rational. Maybe it was a message meant for someone else, a joke from a friend, or an autocorrect error. Still, curiosity got the better of me, and I reached for her phone. I didn't even get to unlock it. The sound of Sandra's sneakers slapping against the pavement startled me. She was sprinting out of the store, her face pale and frantic. Before I could process her sudden urgency, she flung open the car door and snatched the phone out of my hand. "Forgot something," she muttered, her voice a shaky attempt at nonchalance, before disappearing back into the store. The ride afterward was heavy with silence. The kids dozed off in the back seat, but my mind was racing. Sandra's explanation for her mad dash was flimsy at best. I wanted to confront her then and there, but the thought of ruining our trip stopped me. Instead, I decided to wait and observe. If there was nothing to worry about, I'd know soon enough. But if my gut was right, well, I'd cross that bridge later. The vacation was a blur of forced smiles and suppressed suspicions. Sandra stayed on her phone almost the entire time, claiming she was completing customer surveys for work. When I made a sarcastic comment about her newfound dedication to her job, she laughed it off, but her cheeks flushed slightly. I started noticing other things, too, the way she checked her phone and smiled, the way she seemed distracted during meals, and how her enthusiasm for the trip felt rehearsed. By the time we returned home, the mountain air had done little to clear my mind. I decided to dig deeper. It wasn't like me to snoop, I'd always prided myself on respecting Sandra's privacy, but something about her behavior gnawed at me. Late one night, after she'd gone to bed, I logged into our cell phone account and reviewed her call and text history. That's when I saw it. A number with a Virginia area code appeared dozens of times, at all hours of the day and night. It wasn't one of her coworkers or clients. It wasn't family or a friend I recognized. My stomach churned as I realized this wasn't a casual contact. Whoever this person was, Sandra had been talking to them for months. The next step was running the number through a reverse lookup site. I was hoping for a mundane explanation. Maybe it was a vendor she worked with, or a customer. But the search came back as a VoIP number. That meant whoever owned it was deliberately trying to stay anonymous. My heart sank further. This wasn't just innocent chatter. It was a secret. Over the next few weeks, I pieced together a timeline. Sandra had been taking more work trips than usual, each one coinciding with late-night calls and messages to the mystery number. At first, I told myself I could be overreacting. Maybe she was just venting to a friend about something personal. But as the evidence stacked up, denial became impossible. One night, Sandra announced she'd be going out with some co-workers after work. I nodded, pretending to be indifferent, but as soon as she left, I sprang into action. Her laptop was sitting on the kitchen counter, and I knew she often forgot to log out of her email. Sure enough, her account was open. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the mouse. If I clicked, there'd be no going back. But I needed answers. The emails were damning. Hidden among the mundane exchanges with colleagues and clients were messages to a man named Brian. At first, they were casual, discussing sales strategies and industry gossip. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. There were inside jokes, mentions of stolen moments together, and even photos from places Sandra had never mentioned visiting. My stomach twisted as I realized some of those photos matched the work trips she'd told me about. The final blow came when I stumbled upon a hotel reservation confirmation. It was from a trip she'd taken just a month ago, supposedly for a conference in Richmond. But the reservation was for 2 guests. Brian's name wasn't listed, but I didn't need to see it to know. My worst fears had been confirmed. I spent the rest of the night staring at the screen, the pieces of my life falling apart before my eyes. The woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had betrayed me. Memories of our happiest moments together replayed in my mind, now tainted by the knowledge of her lies. I thought about the nights she'd come home late, claiming to be stuck in traffic, or the mornings she'd left early, for meetings. Every excuse now felt like a dagger. By the time Sandra returned home, I had composed myself. I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. I needed to think about the kids, about our finances, about what this revelation meant for our future. So I pretended everything was fine, greeting her with a casual, "How was your night?" as she walked through the door. But deep down, I knew this was the beginning of the end. The trust that had been the foundation of our marriage was gone, shattered beyond repair. All that was left was the question of how, and when, I would act on what I'd uncovered. The days following Sandra's late-night return were a haze. I went about my routine as if nothing had changed, but the truth weighed heavily on me. Every glance at her phone, every laugh she shared with the kids, every kiss she planted on my cheek felt like an act of betrayal. I was a man living in a stranger's home, unsure of who I was married to anymore. I knew I had to confront her, but I wanted to do it on my terms, with no room for denial. I started documenting everything, screenshots of her emails, phone records, even the hotel receipts. It wasn't just about proving the affair, it was about preparing for what would come after. Divorce wasn't a word I wanted to say out loud, but the thought of staying in a marriage built on lies was unbearable. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I decided it was time. Sandra was in the living room, scrolling through her phone as usual. I walked in, my heart pounding in my chest, and sat down across from her. For a moment, she didn't notice me. Then she looked up, her smile faltering when she saw the expression on my face. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice cautious. I placed the printed emails and hotel receipts on the coffee table between us. "I think you already know." Sandra's eyes flicked to the papers, and her face went pale. She didn't reach for them, didn't say a word. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until I couldn't take it anymore. "How long, Sandra?" My voice was steady, but I could feel the anger simmering beneath the surface. "How long have you been lying to me?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, as if searching for the right words. Finally, she whispered, "Tom, it's not what you think." I scoffed, leaning back in my chair. "Oh, really? Because what I think is that you've been sneaking around with Brian while I stayed home taking care of our kids and paying the bills. So please, enlighten me." Sandra's shoulders slumped, and she buried her face in her hands. "It's not like that," she said, her voice muffled. "I didn't mean for it to happen." "Didn't mean for it to happen?" I snapped. "You don't accidentally book hotel rooms and send flirty emails. You don't accidentally cheat on your husband." Tears streamed down her face as she looked up at me. "I was lonely, Tom. You've been so distant lately, always working, always stressed. I needed someone to talk to." I shook my head, disgusted by her attempt to shift the blame. So your solution was to crawl into another man's bed? Instead of talking to me, your husband, you ran to Brian. It wasn't like that at first, she said, her voice cracking. We started as friends. He listened to me, made me feel valued. And then, it just happened. The excuses were like salt on an open wound. Do you even realize what you've done? I said, my voice rising. You've destroyed our family. Our kids, do you think they won't be affected by this? Do you think they deserve to live in a home built on lies? Sandra sobbed, her hands clutching the edge of the coffee table. I never wanted to hurt you, she said. I love you, Tom. I really do. Don't, I said sharply. Don't you dare tell me you love me. Love doesn't look like this. The confrontation stretched late into the night. Sandra tried to explain, to justify, to beg for forgiveness. She said all the things you'd expect, that she was sorry, that it would never happen again, that she wanted to work on our marriage. But every word felt hollow, tainted by the betrayal that had already occurred. When I finally stood to leave the room, Sandra grabbed my arm. Please, Tom, she said, her voice desperate. Don't throw this away. Think about the kids. Think about everything we've built together. I looked down at her, the woman I had loved for so many years, and felt nothing but a cold, hollow ache. You already threw it away, Sandra, I said quietly. I'm just cleaning up the mess. I slept on the couch that night, staring at the ceiling as the reality of my shattered marriage sank in. Every sound from upstairs, the creak of the floorboards, the soft hum of the kids' nightlight, felt like a reminder of the life I thought I had. A life that no longer existed. The days that followed were tense and awkward. Sandra tiptoed around the house, her eyes red from crying. The kids seemed to sense that something was wrong, asking me why Mom was so quiet and why I wasn't eating dinner with them. I didn't have the heart to tell them the truth, not yet. I started researching divorce attorneys, quietly reaching out to friends who had gone through similar situations. I learned about custody arrangements, asset division, and how to protect myself legally. It was overwhelming, but I knew I couldn't afford to make a mistake. Sandra's betrayal had already cost me enough. One evening, as I sat in the garage going over my notes, Sandra appeared in the doorway. She looked worn and defeated, her usual confidence replaced by a hesitant vulnerability. Tom, she said softly, can we talk? I sighed, setting down my papers. What is it, Sandra? She stepped inside, wringing her hands. I know I've hurt you. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want to fix this. For us. For the kids. Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything we'd lost. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that we could somehow rebuild what was broken. But the other part of me, the part that had seen the emails and the hotel receipts, the part that had spent sleepless nights questioning everything, knew better. I don't know if that's possible, I said finally. You didn't just hurt me, Sandra. You destroyed my trust. And without trust, what do we have? Sandra's lip trembled, but she nodded. I understand, she said. I just hope you'll think about it. For the kids, if nothing else. I didn't respond. What could I say? That I'd think about it. That I'd try to forgive her. I wasn't sure I could make those promises. Not anymore. As Sandra left the garage, I stared at the stack of papers in front of me. They were my lifeline, my plan for moving forward. But as I sat there, the enormity of what lay ahead began to sink in. Divorce wasn't just a word, it was a battle. One I wasn't sure I was ready to fight. But I knew I had no choice. The life I thought I had was gone. All that was left was to figure out what came next. The morning after Sandra's plea in the garage, I sat alone at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The house was eerily quiet. Sandra had taken the kids to school, and for the first time in years, I found myself with nothing to distract me from the storm inside my head. I pulled out my laptop and stared at the tabs I'd left open: divorce attorneys, financial planners, articles about explaining separation to kids. Each one felt like a knife twisting deeper into the wound. But there was no avoiding it. Sandra's betrayal had left no room for ambiguity. If I wanted to move forward, I had to start making decisions. The first step was meeting with an attorney. The man I chose, a no-nonsense professional named Arthur, came highly recommended by a friend. Sitting across from him in his sleek office, I laid out everything I had: the emails, the hotel receipts, the phone records. Arthur skimmed through the documents with a practiced eye, nodding occasionally. "You've done your homework," he said finally. "This is more than enough to establish infidelity, which will work in your favor if things get contentious." "Contentious?" I echoed, my stomach tightening. Arthur leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Divorces involving infidelity often escalate quickly. Spouses lash out, especially when there are assets and children involved. You need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Sandra may fight you on custody or try to claim a larger share of your finances." I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The idea of fighting Sandra in court, of turning our private pain into a public spectacle, was almost too much to bear. But what choice did I have? Staying in the marriage was out of the question, and I couldn't let Sandra's betrayal dictate the terms of our separation. Back at home, Sandra seemed to sense the shift in me. I was no longer just hurt or angry, I was resolute. She tried to bridge the growing chasm between us, making small talk over dinner or sitting beside me on the couch after the kids went to bed. But I kept my distance, unwilling to let her back in. One evening, as we cleared the table, Sandra finally broke the silence. "Have you thought any more about what I said? About trying to work things out?" I set down the plate I was holding and turned to face her. "Sandra, do you honestly believe we can come back from this? That I can just forget everything you've done?" She flinched at the harshness of my tone but held her ground. "I don't expect you to forget, Tom. But we have a family. We owe it to the kids to at least try." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Don't you dare use the kids as a shield for your actions. They're the reason I stayed quiet for as long as I did. But I'm not going to pretend everything's fine just to keep up appearances." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. I had spent weeks drowning in my own pain, and now it was her turn to face the consequences. As the weeks passed, the house became a battlefield of unspoken tension. The kids noticed, of course. Emma, our oldest, started asking questions, her sharp intuition picking up on the cracks in our family's foundation. "Why are you and Mom always so quiet?" she asked one night as I tucked her into bed. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements," I said finally. "But we both love you and Daniel very much. That will never change." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on mine, searching for reassurance I couldn't fully give. As I left her room, I realized how much harder this would be for them. Sandra and I were adults, we could rationalize our choices and learn to live with the consequences. But Emma and Daniel were innocent bystanders, caught in the crossfire of a war they didn't start. Sandra's efforts to salvage our marriage grew increasingly desperate. She suggested counseling, date nights, even a family vacation to reset. Each time, I refused. The thought of sitting in a room and pretending to rebuild what she had destroyed felt like an insult to my dignity. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Tom, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm begging you, don't give up on us." I stared at her, my anger and sadness warring with the faintest hint of pity. "Sandra, I don't even know who you are anymore. You've been lying to me for months, maybe years. How am I supposed to trust anything you say? She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, I saw the full weight of her guilt. I'll do whatever it takes, she said quietly. Anything. Just tell me how to fix this. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Some things, once broken, could never be repaired. As the divorce process began, Sandra's demeanor shifted. The woman who had once begged for reconciliation now seemed resigned to the inevitable. She agreed to mediation, and while our sessions were tense, they were civil. I pushed for primary custody of the kids, knowing I could provide them with the stability they needed. Sandra didn't fight me on it, though the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. The day we signed the papers was surreal. Sandra and I sat across from each other in a sterile conference room, our attorneys flanking us like referees. As I scrawled my name on the dotted line, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. This was the end of a chapter one had never imagined would close this way. When it was over, Sandra turned to me, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "For everything." I nodded, unable to find the words to respond. Then I walked out of the room, leaving behind the life we had built together. It was time to start over. Life after the divorce was quieter than I expected. The house felt emptier, even though Emma and Daniel were with me most of the time. I thought the absence of Sandra's presence would be a relief, a clean slate for me and the kids. But it wasn't. Instead, it was a constant reminder of everything we'd lost: family dinners, shared laughter, the illusion of stability. The emptiness hung in the air, refusing to dissipate. Sandra moved into a small apartment across town. We kept our interactions minimal, sticking to the logistics of co-parenting. She seemed subdued in those exchanges, no longer pleading or bargaining, just going through the motions. The fiery desperation that once fueled her attempts at reconciliation was gone, replaced by a quiet sadness that made me uneasy. Months passed, and the routine of single parenthood began to feel normal. I focused on the kids, throwing myself into their school activities, soccer games, and movie nights. I was determined to be the anchor they needed. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming, cracks I didn't notice until it was too late. One Friday evening, as I was preparing dinner, Emma approached me with her phone in hand. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "Mom hasn't answered any of my texts today." "That's weird, right?" I glanced at the clock. It was past 7. Sandra was usually quick to reply, especially when it came to the kids. "She's probably busy," I said, trying to sound reassuring. But a knot of worry formed in my stomach. Let me try calling her. The phone rang and rang before going to voicemail. I called again, then a third time, with the same result. The knot tightened. "Stay here with your brother," I told Emma, grabbing my keys. "I'll go check on her." The drive to Sandra's apartment felt surreal. My mind raced with possibilities: she could be asleep, her phone on silent, or maybe she'd gone out. But a gnawing fear kept growing with every mile. When I arrived, I knocked on the door, calling her name. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time, my heart pounding. A neighbor peeked out from their door. "She hasn't been out all day," they said. I thought she was just keeping to herself. Something was wrong. I called the building manager, explaining the situation with a shaky voice. He hesitated but eventually agreed to unlock the door. The moment the door swung open, I knew. The apartment was silent, too silent. Sandra was on the couch, her head tilted to one side, an empty bottle of pills on the coffee table. A handwritten note lay beside it. My legs felt like lead as I stepped inside, dread pooling in my chest. "Tom," the note began, her handwriting shaky but deliberate. I couldn't do it anymore. Living with the guilt, the shame, the loneliness, it's too much. I've hurt you and the kids in ways I can never fix. I thought I could start over, but I've realized I don't deserve that chance. Please tell Emma and Daniel I love them more than anything. And please, don't let my mistakes define them. I'm so sorry." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I sank to my knees, clutching the note, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The room spun around me, the weight of everything crashing down at once. Sandra was gone. The woman I had loved, hated, resented, she was gone, and no amount of anger or grief could bring her back. The days that followed were a blur. Telling Emma and Daniel was the hardest thing I've ever done. Emma sobbed uncontrollably, her small body racked with grief. Daniel, too young to fully understand, kept asking when Mom was coming back. I held them both, feeling utterly helpless, wishing I could shield them from this pain. Sandra's funeral was small and somber. Her parents, distant in life, were now inconsolable, their regret palpable. I stood by the grave, my children clinging to me, and felt a hollowness I couldn't describe. Sandra's betrayal had broken us, but her death shattered us in a way I hadn't thought possible. In the weeks that followed, I found myself replaying every moment of our marriage, trying to pinpoint where things had gone wrong. I thought about the times I had been distant, too caught up in work to notice her struggles. I thought about her betrayal, the choices she made that tore us apart. But most of all, I thought about the final words in her note, "Don't let my mistakes define them." I vowed to honor that. For Emma and Daniel, I would be the best father I could be. I would remind them every day of how much their mother loved them, even if her actions had been flawed. I would teach them about forgiveness, about resilience, about the complexity of human relationships. But as I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed her. That in my quest for justice, I had overlooked her pain. And now it was too late to make amends. Life moved on, as it always does, but the scars remained. Sandra's absence was a shadow that lingered in our home, in our hearts. And as much as I wanted to rebuild, to heal, I knew that some wounds never fully close.